and I'm sure a lot of the front-wheel drive enthusiasts in the comments will let me know how wrong I am, and that's fine. We can all have different opinions. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Las Vegas, Nevada, and today we're discussing, should you buy a Toyota GR86 or Subaru BRZ? Now, for those who don't know, I've owned my 2022 Toyota GR86 since July of 2022, so coming up on a year now. I have 6,400 miles on the odometer, and I have been loving driving this car. It is a lot of fun. I currently have a 2-car garage. This and my daily is my Mazda CX-50. This will slowly be becoming more and more of my track day toy, and I do have a Lotus Emira on the way as well. So 3-car solution, and I gotta say, this car, after driving more and more vehicles on this YouTube channel, on Jubbal and Cars, it has made me appreciate the GR86 and BRZ even more for what they are. I think they are a stupid good deal. In fact, if they charged more money for these cars, I would still say they are the car to get for a certain type of individual. Now the question is, are you that type of individual? Does this car make sense for you or does it not? And that's what I want to help you decide today in this video. There are 2 use cases for which this car really speaks to me. Of course, there are many other valid use cases. If you're all about stance nation and you want to stance your GR86, maybe it's a good stance car, I don't know. That's just not what I'm into. I don't know much about it. There are probably many other use cases, but what speaks to me are 2 things. The first is, if you are a younger individual, you don't have much of a disposable income, you don't have a big family. I bought a 2013 Scion FRS in my first year of med school back in 2013, and $24,000. It was an amazing car for what I needed at that time. And this car is just the spiritual successor. It's very similar, much more similar than different than that car. The engine and interior are much nicer in this vehicle versus the first gen. But by and large, in terms of usability, driving experience, etc., they're more similar than different. The second use case is the individual who wants a weekend track toy or canyon carver, etc., and they do not actually want a convertible. Not everyone likes convertibles, guys. A lot of people don't. I actually used to not like convertibles. Now I could see myself getting one, possibly. And this car delivers so much driving pleasure. That's the key thing. So ultimately, if you care about either driving pleasure or improving your driver's skill, this car is very hard to beat. And I feel even more confident saying that now after I've driven dozens and dozens, probably close to 100 different cars now on Jubbal and Cars. This car it's a taut, lightweight chassis, front engine, rear wheel drive, nice manual transmission, good inputs, good chassis dynamics, and it allows you to develop as a driver, to explore the limit in a safe manner, especially if you get the base trim like I have. This is the base, you can tell because there's no Alcantara here in the interior. Because the base trim comes with the primacy tires, which are very low grip, meaning you can break traction at low speeds. And by breaking traction at low speeds, whether that's, you should not be doing that on public roads, but if you're doing that on the track, you can explore the limit and improve as a driver, because you improve as a driver by exploring the limit. If you get a really high performance Porsche, Corvette, etc., you're not as experienced as a driver. It's much more difficult for you to actually progress and improve, because it's much harder to approach that limit in a safe manner. Because if you're getting to the limit, which is much higher in those cars, and you don't know what you're doing, and you f up, then you're going straight into the wall. So it's very important for people who want to become good drivers to start off with cars that are comparatively slower, or rather have lower limits than those really high performance Porsches, Corvettes, etc. My own driver skill has developed so much. You can watch we did a track analysis of my first time ever at Laguna Seca. Compare that to now, it's hard to believe it's even the same driver. It's a complete transformation. Now I'm a driving instructor with PCA and Audi Club and Speed Ventures and etc., etc. I'm not, I still have a lot more to learn, but from where I started to where I am now, that improvement happened at a very fast pace, because I had a car that was so useful as a driving tool, as a learning tool. The other part of that is the driving enjoyment. This car is so engaging and rewarding to drive, and part of it is related, because when a car has lower limits, when it has good inputs, when it has good chassis dynamics, you are generally going to enjoy driving it in a sporty manner more so than a car that doesn't. Now, some may say, hey, what about this Civic Type R or or Elantra Type N, or a lot of these cars that are performance oriented, that are front engine, front wheel drive, or front engine all wheel drive with a front wheel bias, they are not, in my experience and based on what I enjoy when it comes to driving, they're nowhere close to as enjoyable. The reason being, for me personally, I prioritize throttle steer very highly. And when I'm not able to control the angle of a car with throttle, it removes a lot of that driving enjoyment for me when I'm pushing the car closer to the limit, whether that's on canyons where I'm driving maybe 7/10, or on the track where I'm going 10/10. Now again, that's just my bias, and I'm sure a lot of the front wheel drive enthusiasts in the comments will let me know how wrong I am, and that's fine. We can all have different opinions. I have never driven a front wheel drive car, including the Civic Type R, that I feel is as fun and rewarding compared to a good FR platform. Now, going back to those use cases, I want to add that the reason it makes so much sense if you're a young guy or a young girl who's a car enthusiast who doesn't have much disposable income is this car slaps so insanely hard for its price. I would pay more money for this car and still be happy. The driving dynamics, the looks, everything about it is just, it's such an insanely good deal for 30 grand. Insanely good deal. It's still hard for me to believe you get all this car and this driving pleasure at this price. Now, sure, the engine doesn't sound the best. The steering isn't as good as the first gen. There are issues here and there, and I talk a lot about those extensively on my GR86 playlist. But it doesn't change the fact that today, if you want to buy a car new with warranty, it's this or a Miata. And sure, you have some of those muscle car offerings, but they're a lot heavier. They're not as playful. I don't think they give the same driving enjoyment that these cars do, the BRZ and GR86 twins. Now, the other thing to keep in mind between 86 and BRZ is the BRZ is tuned in a way that's a little bit softer, a little bit more comfortable. And if you're okay with that front bumper, which I think is quite ugly, I think the GR86 looks way better. But the BRZ is going to be a little bit more comfortable day to day. I don't think it's going to be a night and day difference. I mean, I've driven both. It is noticeable. And if you are going to daily yours and you are more sensitive to that, then go with the BRZ. Unless you plan on modifying your suspension, obviously you can do that in the aftermarket too if you want to go to the GR86 route. But going back to being a young person, the price is very reasonable, especially for what you're getting. And it's actually very practical. When you fold the seats down, you can, I have moved between apartments, obviously no furniture, but all my other belongings, all my clothes, my electronics, etc. can fit in the vehicle with, I'm putting stuff in the front seat, I'm folding the rear seats down. There's a lot of space. It's like a clown car, the amount of stuff you can fit in this vehicle. It is surprisingly practical. But not to the point where if you're in your 30s, you have a family, you have some big animals, you have kids, then you're going to start feeling the issues with practicality. And at that point, that's why it makes much more sense to be a track toy or a weekend canyon carver and not a primary day-to-day vehicle. Now, of course, it's going to work for some people, but for a lot of people, that's going to be a non-starter right there. The other thing I found that brings me so much pleasure, this happened in 2020. So I used to baby and take such good care of my FRS for so many years. I would wash it myself, hand washed every time, no one else for 6-7 years. I had the front clear broad, I had it opti-coated on top of that. I clearly cared a lot about the car. Part of it was the sentimental value because it represented so much grind and struggle and adversity and overcoming that. But it was in 2020 when I realized, why am I babying this thing that, first of all, is not worth very much, and in the used market it was probably worth around between 10 and 13 grand at that time. And yet I'm I'm always careful to park it in a certain way. I was just babying it way more than necessary. And 2020 COVID comes around, my business does very well, and I'm also exposed to the, as we all are, to the finiteness, the fragility of life with the pandemic. And I'm like, hold up, this vehicle should be used as a tool to bring me joy. And at the beginning of 2020, I think the car had around 42,000 miles. When I sold it mid-2023, it had 77,000 miles. I put over 30K in a year and a half. And that's because partially I wasn't flying. I was driving around a lot in that car, to SoCal, to NorCal, etc. Started tracking the car a lot. Started beating on it real hard. Got an oil cooler in San Diego. Went up Palomar Mountain, just redlining it, going really hard. obviously taking care of the car, doing, oil changes and waiting for the engine to get up to temp, but also wringing it out for all that it's worth. And the two things I learned there was that, number one, it pays to have a car that you can comfortably afford. If that car got totaled, and even if my insurance did not cover it at all, I could have replaced the car very easily and not stressed about it. It's like a 10, 15 grand car used at that time, not a huge deal. And even this car now, if something happened to it, insurance would cover it. But even still, if something happened, and let's say something happened on the track, where insurance is not going to cover things unless you get track day insurance, and I needed to replace the vehicle, it would not ruin my life. It would suck, but it would not ruin my life. And that freedom, that ability to not care and not be beholden to a vehicle, to a possession, not have the possession own you own the possession without having any strings attached, any, being overly concerned about it. There's a certain amount of liberation and freedom and joy that comes from that I think is just so precious and so underappreciated. And partially that's the reason why I want to keep a cheap sports car in my garage. Because at the end of the day, if it's cheap and I don't have to worry about it and I can really just wring it out for all it's worth, I'm going to have a very different relationship to that vehicle and experience with that vehicle versus if I'm driving around a $100,000 Lotus Emira where I do care a little bit more about it. I have to be a little bit more careful. I may not want to push it as hard on the track because I'm worried if something happens to it, it's going to be much more expensive to replace. So my non-car enthusiast friends think I am a complete lunatic for even having two cars right now, my sports car and my CX-50, and an even greater lunatic for wanting a third car, a Lotus Emira, for which I've been on the wait list for the last over a year and a half. But that's part of it. I mean, part of it too is I think FR and MR give substantially different driving experiences, which is why I'm more interested in having an MR and an FR rather than two FRs or two MRs, as an example. Overall, Toyota and Subaru did a fantastic job with this vehicle. I mean, sure, I wish there's small things here and there that I talk about in other videos, like the steering is definitely better in the first gen, as an example. But these cars are so hard to beat today. If you're a driving enthusiast, more so than a car enthusiast, if you care more about how a car makes you feel when you're behind the wheel, if you care more about improving your driver's skill rather than being a spec sheet warrior, between this and Miata, it's one of the two, really. And the Miata is obviously much more of a compromised vehicle, so it's much harder, even if you're in your early 20s, you don't have a family, etc., it's a lot harder to live day to day with that. It is possible, but it's a lot harder. You are making more of a sacrifice versus a car like this. And again, that depends on how much you value the drop-top experience, which for me isn't all that important personally. And there you have it, boys. Should you or should you not buy a Toyota GR86 or a Subaru BRZ? Let me know, what do you think? Which one would you choose between the two, or would you go Miata? Or am I totally wrong and is the right answer a Hyundai, Elantra Type N, or similar? Much love, my friends. Thank you all so much for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in the next one.